The words landed in Providence Municipal Court like a stone through glass. Judge Frank Caprio looked up from his bench, reading glasses perched on his nose, expression unchanged. The gallery shifted. Officer Martinez, standing near the rail, straightened his posture. Miss Chen, the court clerk, glanced at the judge with the kind of look that comes from years of reading a room. Wealth funds, scholarships, and hospitals. It builds wings on museums and names on buildings. But in this room, at 10:15 a.m., on a Tuesday morning, it bought nothing. The difference between transaction and accountability is the difference between a checkbook and a conscience. Lucas Harrington was about to learn which one mattered more. Behind Lucas sat his attorney, briefcase open, already calculating exit strategies. Elliot Vance had handled hundreds of traffic cases. Most ended with a plea, a fine, and a handshake. This one felt different from the moment Lucas had insisted on speaking first. The case file was thin, but damning. 2 prior warnings. 1 ignored summons. A pattern of behavior that suggested the rules applied to everyone but him. 10 months earlier, Lucas had received a written advisory for parking in a fire lane outside Providence General Hospital. The citation included a warning. Future violations would result in escalated penalties. The letter was signed for on December 3, 2024. Lucas never opened it. The advisory wasn't about the parking. It was about the habit. About the assumption that inconvenience could be solved with influence. That morning in October, that assumption nearly cost a child her life. Martha Ellis had been a crossing guard for 19 years. She knew the rhythm of school mornings, the backpacks, the laughter, the careful choreography of children moving through intersections. On October 12th, that rhythm shattered. Her written statement, submitted 3 days after the incident, described a black sedan accelerating through a marked school zone at 52 miles per hour. Speed limit, 20. She had stepped into the crosswalk with her stop sign raised. The car swerved. A second grader froze. The vehicle missed the child by less than 3 feet. Martha didn't get the license plate. Her hands were shaking too hard to write. But she remembered the emblem on the hood, and she remembered the driver's face when he rolled down the window, not to apologize, but to argue. Safety isn't a suggestion. It's infrastructure. And when someone treats it like an inconvenience, the structure collapses. Officer Paul Martinez had been a traffic officer for 11 years. He'd written hundreds of citations. This one stayed with him. The timestamp on the dash cam was clear. 8:04 a.m. The audio was clearer. The body cam footage showed Lucas stepping out of his vehicle, sunglasses still on, phone in hand. When Officer Martinez explained the violation, Lucas interrupted 3 times. When the officer began writing the citation, Lucas tore it in half. The exact words, captured at 8:06 a.m., would be played in court 17 minutes into the hearing, but everyone in the gallery already knew what was coming. Fame doesn't qualify as a license. Influence doesn't override law. And defiance, no matter how expensive the suit, still carries consequences. The silence that followed Officer Martinez's testimony lasted 5 seconds, then 7, then 10, then 12. Those 12 seconds were the sound of power meeting principle. Judge Caprio sat perfectly still, hands folded on the bench. Lucas shifted in his chair. His attorney reached for a pen but didn't write anything. The journalist in the second row stopped taking notes. Silence in a courtroom isn't empty. It's full of everything people aren't saying. Full of calculations and recalibrations. Full of the moment when arrogance realizes it's been weighed and found wanting. The evidence wasn't ambiguous. Dashcam footage showed the speed. Bodycam audio captured the defiance. 2 certified summons sat in the file. Both signed for, both ignored. And then there was the voicemail. It had arrived at the court administrator's office at 8:47 a.m., 2 hours before the hearing. The caller identified himself as Director of Community Relations for Harrington Energy Holdings. The message was polite, professional, and entirely inappropriate. The voicemail suggested that Mr. Harrington Sr. had contributed significantly to municipal infrastructure projects, that the family had a long-standing relationship with civic leadership, that perhaps a quiet resolution would serve everyone's interests. The email, sent at 9:12 a.m., was more direct. It outlined recent donations: $150,000 to the Providence Public Library expansion, $80,000 to the Youth Athletic Complex, $200,000 to the Harbor Restoration Initiative. The implication was clear. Influence is acceptable in philanthropy. It has no place in procedure. Judge Caprio had the clerk read both the voicemail transcript and the email into the record. Every word, every insinuation, every attempt to convert generosity into leverage. Donations build communities. They don't buy immunity. And the moment someone confuses the two, the integrity of both collapses. Martha Ellis couldn't attend the hearing in person. She was scheduled to work the morning crossing at Roosevelt Elementary, but she called in via the court's phone testimony line. Her voice was steady but quiet. She described what she'd seen: the speed, the swerve, the way the little girl, her name was Sophie, had frozen in the middle of the crosswalk. She described the aftermath: how Sophie's mother had to hold her hand every morning for 2 weeks before the child would cross the street again. How the other kids asked questions Martha didn't know how to answer. How she filed the incident report knowing it might not matter. Every crosswalk is a promise that someone is watching, that someone will stop, that the rules exist to protect the people who can't protect themselves. Break that promise, and someone always pays. Usually not the person who broke it. The courtroom had gone still. Not the nervous quiet of a crowded space holding its breath, but the dense silence of a moment that would be remembered. Lucas Harrington sat in his chair, jaw tight, hands flat on the table. His attorney had stopped writing. The journalist in the second row leaned forward. Judge Caprio removed his glasses, set them on the bench, and looked directly at Lucas. Then Lucas spoke. The outburst lasted less than 30 seconds, but it contained multiples: frustration, entitlement, and the kind of rage that comes from never being told no. He talked about his family's tax contributions, about the buildings that bore his father's name, about the jobs Harrington Energy created and the scholarships the foundation funded. He talked about how much his family had done for Providence, for Rhode Island, for communities that should be grateful. And then he said it. The exact words don't need repeating. They're in the transcript. But the meaning was unmistakable. Ownership, not of property or business, but of people, of systems, of the very authority sitting across from him. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. 5 seconds. 7, 10, 12. Judge Caprio's face remained composed, but something had shifted. The temperature in the room hadn't changed. The authority had. Privilege is a mirror. It shows you what you avoid. And in that moment, Lucas Harrington saw himself clearly for the first time. The findings were methodical. Judge Caprio spoke slowly, deliberately, referring to specific evidence at specific timestamps. Count 1, reckless driving through a posted school zone, supported by dashcam video showing 52 miles per hour in a 20 mile per hour zone, Officer Martinez's testimony, and Martha Ellis's phone statement. Liable. Count 2, destruction of a citation, corroborated by body cam audio at 8:06 a.m., and physical evidence of torn citation collected at scene. Liable. Count 3, failure to appear on 2 certified summons, both signed for one on October 14th, one on October 28th. Court records showed neither appearance nor communication. Liable. Count 4, contempt of court, demonstrated by behavior during these proceedings, specifically statements made at 10:47 a.m. and documented in real-time transcript. Liable. The base fine came to $1,200. $400 would be stayed pending completion of restitution requirements. But the sentence wasn't about money. It never had been. 150 hours of community service, 75 with the Traffic Safety Coalition, assisting in school zone monitoring, data collection, and public safety audits. 75 with the Accident Prevention Program, working directly with families affected by reckless driving incidents. 2 apology letters, handwritten, to Officer Martinez and Martha Ellis. Drafts would be reviewed by the court for tone and substance before final submission. 1 public service announcement on the dangers of reckless driving and the responsibility that comes with privilege, to be recorded in coordination with the Providence Public Schools Safety Office and broadcast at 3 local high schools during assemblies. Completion of a municipal civic ethics module, a 4-week course on governance, accountability, and the separation of private influence from public duty, and a 1,000-word reflection essay titled Power versus Responsibility, due in 14 weeks, to be read aloud at a return hearing. Mercy isn't a discount, it's a lesson priced in time. Judge Caprio then did something unusual. He read a formal recommendation into the record, a set of policy reforms to be forwarded to the City Council and the Municipal Court Administration, a public donor influence log, documenting any attempt by third parties to contact court officials regarding pending cases. A municipal firewall policy prohibiting corporate or philanthropic representatives from approaching judges or staff outside formal legal channels. A school zone camera review panel to audit enforcement and accident trends. An offender education PSA initiative using real cases to create public awareness materials. And a citizen report hotline for documenting intimidation or influence attempts. The policies weren't punitive. They were structural. They addressed not just Lucas Harrington's behavior, but the system that had allowed him to believe behavior didn't matter. Reform isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the next person doesn't get the same opportunity to cause harm. The first 2 weeks were the hardest. Lucas showed up to his Traffic Safety Coalition shift 15 minutes late on day 1, dressed in clothes better suited for a yacht club than a municipal work assignment. The coordinator, a retired fire captain named Tom Brennan, handed him a reflective vest and a clipboard. Tom didn't lecture. He explained. The data Lucas would be collecting: vehicle speeds, crosswalk compliance rates, near-miss incidents fed into traffic engineering decisions, school zone redesigns, signage placement, enforcement priorities. By week 3, Lucas was on time. By week 5, he'd stopped checking his phone during briefings. By week 7, he was asking questions about the data trends. The Accident Prevention Program was different. It put faces to consequences. Lucas met a mother whose daughter had been struck in a crosswalk 2 years earlier. The girl survived but spent 8 months relearning how to walk. Her name was Emily. She was 10 when it happened, 12 now. She still limped. He met a father whose son hadn't survived. The driver had been texting. 16-year-old kid, good student, full scholarship to URI. Gone in the time it takes to read a message. Lucas sat in metal folding chairs in community center basements and church meeting rooms and listened. He heard about medical bills and therapy sessions and the kind of grief that doesn't fit into a victim impact statement. He began to understand that reckless wasn't an adjective. It was a choice, and choices have destinations. His first draft of the apology letter to Officer Martinez was rejected. Too formal. Too detached. It read like a legal document written by someone trying to avoid liability. The court-appointed reviewer, a restorative justice coordinator named Dr. Evelyn Price, sent it back with a single note. This isn't an indemnification. It's an apology. Try again. Lucas rewrote it 4 times. The 4th version was shorter, simpler, and honest. It acknowledged what he'd done, what he'd risked, and what he'd failed to understand. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It stated accountability. Officer Martinez sent a brief reply 2 weeks later. It said only, "Received. Thank you." The letter to Martha Ellis took longer. Lucas didn't know how to address a crossing guard, didn't know how to apologize for something that almost happened, didn't know how to put into words the image that now lived in his head, a 7-year-old girl frozen in a crosswalk 3 feet from a car he'd been driving. He wrote 6 drafts. The 6th one included a line he'd never written before. "I'm sorry I made you afraid." Martha's reply came a week later. It was handwritten, 2 pages, and it thanked him. Not for the apology, but for showing up to Roosevelt Elementary one afternoon in December to talk to the students about traffic safety. She said he'd remembered their names. Lucas didn't remember deciding to go to the school. He just remembered standing in front of a classroom of second graders, reflective vest still on from his coalition shift, trying to explain why speed limits exist. One of the kids asked if he was famous. He said no. Another asked if he'd ever broken the rules. He said yes. A third asked if he was sorry. He said yes again, and meant it. The PSA took 7 takes. The first 6 sounded rehearsed, like a hostage reading a script. Lucas sat in front of a camera in the public school's media room, read from a teleprompter, and delivered lines that technically said the right things but emotionally said nothing. The producer, a patient woman named Lisa Tran, stopped him after take 6. She asked him a question. "Why does this matter to you?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. He thought about Sophie, frozen in the crosswalk. About Emily, relearning how to walk. About the father whose son never made it to college. Take 7 was different. No teleprompter, no script. Just Lucas, filmed at 6:30 p.m. on a Thursday after a 10-hour shift, looking tired and sounding real. He talked about what he'd learned. About the difference between having power and deserving it. About how easy it is to ignore consequences when you've never faced them. About how privilege isn't something you inherit, it's something you're responsible for. The PSA aired at 3 Providence high schools in February. It was added to the district's driver education curriculum in March. By April, the Traffic Safety Coalition had received requests from schools in Warwick, Cranston, and Pawtucket. One student emailed the coalition office. The message read, "I didn't think someone like that could change. But maybe, if he can, anyone can." The Civic Ethics module met every Tuesday evening for 4 weeks in a municipal building conference room. 12 participants, all court-referred, all there for different reasons. The instructor, a retired city councilman named Bernard Wallace, didn't lecture about ethics. He asked questions. What's the difference between influence and corruption? When does access become leverage? How do you separate personal relationships from public duty? What happens when the people with the most resources have the most access to power? Lucas didn't talk much the first 2 sessions. He listened. He watched a small business owner describe trying to navigate permitting while watching connected developers fast-track approvals. He heard a community organizer explain how donor lists shaped which neighborhoods got infrastructure improvements. In week 3, Bernard asked the group, "Has anyone here ever used their position to avoid a consequence?" Lucas raised his hand. So did 4 other people. The conversation that followed wasn't about shame. It was about systems, about how power protects itself, about why reform requires more than good intentions. It requires structural change. Lucas wrote in his reflection essay, "I thought connections were an asset. I didn't realize they were a liability to everyone else." The reflection essay took Lucas 6 weeks to write. The assignment was 1,000 words. His first draft was 487. His second was 1,842. His final submission was 1,003 words. It wasn't elegant. It didn't cite philosophers or legal precedents, but it was honest. He wrote about growing up with a last name that opened doors before he learned how to knock, about attending schools where consequences were negotiable and mistakes were managed by other people, about the difference between being told you're special and earning the right to believe it. He wrote about October 12th, about the moment he tore up the citation, genuinely believing it didn't matter, about the phone call his father's office made, assuming proximity to power could substitute for accountability. He wrote about Martha Ellis and Sophie, about Officer Martinez standing in the rain writing a citation while Lucas argued about schedules, about Emily, still limping 2 years later, and he wrote about the 12 seconds of silence after he said something he could never take back. Privilege, he wrote in the final paragraph, isn't what you have, it's what you don't notice. And the most dangerous kind of privilege is the kind that makes you think you're owed something you haven't earned. The return hearing was scheduled for March 18th. 16 weeks after sentencing, Lucas arrived at 9:30 a.m. for a 10 a.m. hearing. No designer sunglasses. No impatience. He carried a folder with documentation, signed timesheets from both community service placements, certificates of completion from the civic ethics module, copies of the final apology letters, and the PSA broadcast confirmations. Officer Martinez was present. So was Martha Ellis, attending in person this time. Tom Brennan from the Traffic Safety Coalition sent a written statement. So did Dr. Price from the Accident Prevention Program. When Judge Caprio asked Lucas to summarize his reflection essay, Lucas didn't read from notes. He spoke for 6 minutes without interruption. He talked about the difference between inheriting power and earning respect. He described sitting with Emily's mother and hearing about the 8 months of physical therapy. He mentioned the kids at Roosevelt Elementary who asked if he was sorry and how that question had stayed with him. He admitted he'd never thought about what happened after someone like him drove away. About who cleaned up the consequences. About who carried the fear. Judge Caprio listened without interruption. When Lucas finished, the judge leaned back in his chair and looked at the documentation on his desk. $400 of the fine was remitted. The record would reflect full compliance with all restitution requirements. The contempt charge would remain on record, as it should, but the sentence had been served. But Judge Caprio added something. He told Lucas that accountability isn't a destination, it's a practice. That the work doesn't end when the hours are complete or the essay is submitted. That the real test comes when no one is watching. Power without discipline, the judge said, is danger. You've learned discipline. Don't forget where it came from. 6 months after the hearing, Providence Municipal Court adopted Judge Caprio's policy recommendations. The public donor influence log documented 3 attempts in its first month. All 3 were disclosed. All 3 resulted in ethics reviews. 1 resulted in a corporate representative being barred from future municipal contact. The firewall policy was adopted by the City Council in April. Any attempt to contact judges, court staff, or municipal officials regarding pending cases outside formal legal channels would trigger automatic disclosure and potential sanctions. The Traffic Safety Coalition expanded its school zone camera review program. Accident rates near crosswalks dropped by 18% over the following year. Near-miss incidents declined by 23%. The PSA initiative became a permanent program. By June, 12 additional offenders had participated in recording public awareness messages. The videos were incorporated into driver education curricula in 7 Rhode Island school districts. The Citizen Report hotline received 47 calls in its first 6 months. 11 resulted in investigations. 3 resulted in policy changes. Officer Martinez, asked about the Lucas Harrington case during a department training session, kept his answer brief. He showed up, every shift, on time, did the work. That's more than most people do. Martha Ellis sent an email to the court in April. It was short but specific. Lucas had visited Roosevelt Elementary 3 times after his requirement was complete. He'd helped install new crosswalk signage. He'd attended a PTA meeting about traffic safety. He'd learned the names of the students in Mrs. Peterson's 2nd grade class, the class that included Sophie. Tom Brennan wrote a letter to Judge Caprio in May. He reported that Lucas had asked to continue volunteering with the coalition after his hours were complete. He's good with the data, Tom wrote. But more importantly, he understands why it matters. Lucas Harrington walked into Providence Municipal Court on a Tuesday morning with a last name that opened doors, a father who made phone calls, and an assumption that the rules bent for people like him. He left with a lesson that couldn't be bought, inherited, or explained away. Not because the punishment was severe, because the accountability was real. Judge Caprio's final words, spoken quietly as the March 18th hearing adjourned, would appear in the Providence Journal the next morning, above the fold, in a story that would be shared across social media for weeks. Authority is not for sale. It is for service. Justice, in the end, isn't about punishment or privilege. It's about what you do when no one is watching, and what you become when someone finally does. It's about 12 seconds of silence that change everything. It's about a crossing guard who remembers names, and an officer who writes citations in the rain, and a judge who understands that mercy and accountability aren't opposites, they're partners. It's about a young man who thought he owned the world, learning that the world doesn't work that way, and never should. And it's about a system that, for once, worked exactly as designed. If you believe justice should be earned, not bought, subscribe to All Rise. Dramatization for storytelling and education, not legal advice or reporting.